Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Hope you're doing great. We're gonna take a couple of minutes just to let people file in. While we're doing that, I'm going to just ask a very quick, easy question for everyone to answer. If you pop it in the chat, just also to check that the chat's actually working. What is your preference, chocolate or vanilla? I want to know this in the chat. Yes, I'm team chocolate, 100%. Yes. Vanilla.
Vanilla is not
vanilla.
a flavor.
Dave, vanilla. Emily, chocolate. We're my chocolate people.
This is a passionate
Nikki, black
group.
and
These
white
things are
cookies.
flying.
It's the chocolate side, obviously.
And it depends on if it's in a bowl or in a cone, because if it's in a cone, you get the vanilla and then you cover it in chocolate. If it's in a bowl, then you just get the chocolate.
All right. This is turning into a heated debate. Honey, you're very specific. Can't separate. Oh, some people like the swirl. Yeah, if you get the soft serve.
I'm starting to think the topic of the webinar is evolving into a debate here.
Yeah, chocolate and vanilla is always a really heated debate. But so as people, we've got tons of people joining. So thank you so much for being here. Just do a super quick housekeeping intros, and then we'll dive into the meat. For those of you who have not joined a Northpass webinar before, my name is Ariel Kranzow. I head up content marketing at Northpass, and I am your host for today. Little bit about me, other than that, is why you see chocolate and vanilla. I have a crazy sweet tooth. I would eat cake for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I have done it before, and I will definitely do it again. So I have no shame on that. And so today, the flow of how this is going to go is pretty standard. We're going to have a really nice conversation. Throughout it, we're going to ask a few questions, polls, make sure you guys, your opinions and what you're talking about are considered so that we can tailor a conversation to who we're talking to. So we're so happy that you guys are all here. At the end, we'll do a Q&A. I'm sure everybody has been on a Zoom before, but I will say it again. There is a Q&A section. So pop your questions throughout into the Q&A. If you will be on the chat as well. So if you have questions that come up throughout the conversation, we want to engage with you. So put them in the chat, and we will. We really look forward to having this conversation. So what we're going to be talking about today, we are going to be talking about the evolution of customer education. For those of you that don't know, Northpass is a learning management system that helps companies educate their customers. And today I am joined with two really awesome people. First off, we have Debbie Smith, who is the newly crowned president of SEDMA, the Customer Education Management Association. So first of all, congrats on that. And she is truly a customer education trailblazer. So we are so thankful to have you here. Thank you so much. And of course, I'm also joined by Steve Cornwell, who is the CEO and founder of Northpass and one of the most passionate customer education enthusiasts around. So again, thank you both for joining us. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. And I'm really excited for this conversation. So yesterday, while I was doing a whole bunch of Googling and discussing what we're going to talk about today, I came across a wonderful trivia question for all of you about people like trivia. Yes? Awesome. So I am going to be giving away, we wrote at Northpass this ABCs of digital customer education. I'm going to be giving away 3 copies of it to the first 3 people who get this question right. So I want you to put it into the chat. Okay, you guys ready? We're ready? Awesome. So we're going to put A, B, or C. It's a multiple choice question into the chat. which brand launched the first ever customer education program back in 1892? Is it A, John Deere, B, Jello, or C, Kodak? Dun, dun, dun. Oh my goodness.
That was fast.
That's
I was not
amazing.
Look at
prepared for
those
that.
responses.
I will be saving the chat and getting in touch with you.
That was great.
Okay, I think I gave enough time. So, so you guys know, in 1892, what was then the Genesee Pure Food Company, which later became the Jello Company, launched the first customer education program called the Jello School of Home Economics, designed to teach homemakers how to use the company's gelatin product in various recipes to promote it as a versatile and inexpensive ingredient. The program was a major success and helped popularize the use of Jello in American households. So there you go, customer education for the win. And I know all of you will be using this trivia question sometime in the next day.
Definitely. And it's really funny to see that that's the least chosen answer.
Least
Yeah,
chosen
really
answer.
It took a
scroll
long
through.
time to get to a B, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think it was
the first one, followed by Tyler, and then it looks like Jennifer. But you'll
Yeah.
have to double check, Ariel.
I'm definitely going to double check. Don't worry. This chat is getting saved. And if you haven't heard from me by tomorrow, just, you know where to find me. So let's just get started. So we're here to talk about the evolution of customer education. So let's just jump right in. What is traditional customer education? Product training? Where did it come from? Why companies offer it? Debbie, where does it come from? Where does it start? What's from your perspective? How does it, you've talked about it going from all the way back, like we've seen it start in the 1800s, but we have lots of examples from, you know, from the 1950s, 60s. Love to hear a little bit about that.
It's really funny because, you know, we don't think of customer education going back to the 1800s, but you look what Jello did. You look actually, I was just mentioning this, the old Fannie Farmer cookbooks. Cookbooks actually used to have the why and the how rather than just the what, the recipes. And sometime around the 60s to the 80s, they started switching and they got much more like a technical manual. And that seems to be really when technical training came back, is people understood we needed to get things to people faster. So we almost oversimplified to the point of only talking about what was on screen or what someone actually had to touch instead of why they had to do things. And so that's a huge change from we had it right, we changed, but that's how we do everything, right? We do everything in cycles. So now we're at this really cool time in our history where we understand that customers really don't care about us. They don't care about our product. They care about solving their problems with it. So customer education now is switching over to talk about the why we're doing things and the best way to do things. You know, there was a time when we actually created manuals like this. And this manual is not that old. This is a manual from one of the companies I worked at. This manual we published in 2019. It is just step by step. It's not the how or the why. But what we had to add to it was we added the trainers who brought all of that in. But as we've become more digital and doing things online in person or doing things asynchronously, we need to actually add that why in from the start.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely about the why you do things. And a lot of that builds on, and like Steve, we were talking about it earlier, you know, there's definitely like the why of doing it, but there's also, you know, how you're actually training customers. Can you fill us in a little bit on that? Like how, like training, the arc of training in terms of how people are getting that information across, like, right, you showed a manual, Debbie, like.
Yeah, I think it fits so well with the with like the trivia question you asked about going back to 1892 when you showed me that. I was like, you got to be kidding me! It's fantastic. And Debbie's point about the recipes, I think when we just like look at the concept of customer training itself, it's one of these business practices that is absolutely essential. It's mission critical to the success of a company. And so whether a business acknowledges it's doing it or not, it is, right? Every company trains its customers. And I think as we look at the how part of it, it's just, it to your point, kind of the arc of it, it really just follows the continuum of how we're advancing, technologically. And I think it always starts with, businesses always start with training as a reactive function, right? We have a product and we may think it was the most intuitive, perfect product in the world, but at the end of the day, no matter how intuitive it is, people do need help. And so that evokes a response from the company to begin training its customers. And I think over time, we've just seen that go from very human-led, very reactive, to a point now where we're thinking about being really proactive about that, and going from a point of it being really manual to a place of being, really, really digital. And I know we're going to talk about that, in some of the upcoming sections. But one of the areas that I wanted to just like double click on with to Debbie's point about the why, I think the why is coming back around to becoming so important, because the economy has changed so much, where we've moved from kind of shipping widgets and shipping goods to providing services. And if we look at, most of our attendees on the line today are from B2B companies, a lot of software companies that are providing subscription-based services. And in order for these services to be successful, it requires companies really change, their fundamental business practice to adopt the product and to get the value from the product. And so there is the, how you point and click and how you use it. That's really important. But that only matters if a company can really actually change and adapt to the new way and the upgraded business process that product serves. So I think that's why we're seeing more of the why become so important today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like there are so many issues that have sort of been popping up with, people's expectations of how they want to be trained. And then also on the creator side of like, all of a sudden now, okay, we know how to create manuals and we know how to give all sorts of like, this is how you click a button from here to there. But there's a really big shift in what's going to help businesses succeed. And so I actually just want to throw a poll out there to all of you. What are the biggest challenges you face in providing effective customer education? I'll give you all a few minutes to fill that out. There we go. Ooh. So sorry, I'm the only one that can see this, but right now, like getting customers to use the actual LMS and limited time and resources are taking the cake.
Is it chocolate cake or vanilla?
It's definitely chocolate.
Chocolate bomb, right?
All right, looks like this poll is slowed down, so I'm just gonna end the poll so I can show all of you last minute, everyone in there. All right, so I'll share these results with you. So you can see that like getting customers to actually use the program and getting people onboarded is a really big challenge. And that's something that we're definitely going to talk about as time, later on in this webinar, and just like access to resource and time. And we talk about CSMs being so busy all the time. We're definitely going to talk about that as well. So awesome. Let's get back to the conversation. So, seeing of all the problems that you can possibly have, or just issues that you can encounter, why is traditional customer education and like specifically, product training and manual training, why is that actually a problem these days? Debbie, would you like to go into that?
Sure. So Steve, I think you hit on something really important when you mentioned CEOs and how they think of their software. CEOs, every CEO I've worked for has made this statement in some form or another, that our software is so easy to use, it doesn't need training, right? Like we've all heard that 100 times. And when you think about it, oftentimes today, it really is that easy. It's, not to pick on Lotus Notes, but back in the day of Lotus Notes, that was a really hard program to understand how to use, even just to use email in it and to set up rules, right? So then you actually did need instructions on clicking the buttons, because the buttons were hidden so far down, you couldn't find them. But with the advent of the UX, our software has gotten easier to click on the buttons, but people need the skills in order to use the software. And that ties directly into the skills and competency models that everyone is starting to talk about. And so if we only train how, that is actually something that can be done through Pendo, WalkMe, Can Do, any of these other software, right, that can get in-app training. So we don't need that. That's something that can be done on its own. But that type of software isn't going to give the best whys, because it's not going to do all of the how-tos and why would I choose this one over that one. You don't want to give people that many choices in product and start popping things up all over them, or you're going to make it harder to use again, right? So the software is easy enough to use. So it's really teaching those skills behind it. What is it that a customer should be thinking about? Often in many of our software, the biggest obstacle to the software is not clicking the buttons and moving through it. Often it's the planning or the process modeling before you use the software that you really need to think about, because as you're building things for people to use, they're all going to use it in different ways. So understanding the best use cases is really important.
Yeah, I think this is you're hitting on such a good point, Debbie. It's like I can really relate to this at a practitioner and a personal level. The whole reason I got this company started was because in a prior business, we had the challenge you're talking about. It was my last business was a data analytics platform for the retail industry. And what we were doing was retraining an entire industry, re-educating an entire industry how to think about their business. And so while we had a data product, what really mattered was we had to get the industry to think about their business differently for that data product to make sense. And so that's why Northpass came to be, was we had that challenge. And I got really passionate about tackling that and making it available for other people. I think more recently, you can see that with like HubSpot. I think is a great example. When they came to market, that most marketers, there wasn't really such a thing as inbound marketing. It was more like a direct response marketing, right, or a more advertising oriented marketing. They had to, for HubSpot to be successful, yes, they had good software, but for that software to even be commercialized and purchased, and for them to grow revenue, they had to first re-educate an entire industry of marketers on this new methodology of inbound. And I think in today's world of these B2B services, where there's so many, a lot of B2B companies have that same challenge, where it really starts with educating and re-educating an industry on a new point of view and a new basis of thought leadership.
I absolutely agree. And I think that, with the advent of all the AI software and the whole chat GPT, that's going to change all of our jobs and change software more. So a lot of the automated clicks that we taught, back in the 90s and early 2000s, that's all so automated now that there's no reason to teach it. But teaching how to interact with all of this new AI, that's going to be huge. And people are afraid that it's going to take away their jobs. It's not going to take away their jobs. It's going to change the nature of their jobs. So everyone in the workforce now is going to have to be re-skilled in order to understand and be comfortable working with a lot of this new software too. And that's a huge opportunity for us as customer education professionals.
I love that point about AI. I think that's just going to be a really interesting evolution on how product training and product interfaces are designed for the future, right? And there's going to be a really big shift around that.
Definitely.
Yeah. So thinking about like all the ways that training has been really up until the last few years, it's been really, manual, and, we've done a lot of, right, just plain, this is how to press the button, this is how you go from here to here to there, and really not focusing on, the why, really like traditional customer education and the way that it's been done. And probably it's the way that that Jell-O did it. It's no longer effective. It inhibits scale. You can't reach all your customers or even potential customers, right? It's all very, very time consuming and expensive. It can be, renting a space if you're doing, a big training, and flying people from here to there. So anyway, in that light, I'm going to just launch one more poll. I'm going to just sort of understand, like, everybody, how are you actually training your customers right now? What are you really focusing on? What's the majority of it? Is it, CSMs? Is it customer education trainers on staff? Just going to say right now, it is 0% sending. Oh, no, we've got a few. Now we've got a few. There we go. Of still just sending traditional training manuals and documentation over email. It's really split. It's really getting split. So customer education trainer-led sessions are winning. And I'm going to just show this to everybody because I was expecting a sort of different result, but really excited to see that the results are really split between self-paced learning through an LMS and customer education trainer-led sessions. I mean, I know we're a very customer education audience here. And so it's good to see that people are really doing it moving into the way that they're doing it. Sorry, I wasn't sharing the results before, but here it is to everybody. But to Debbie and to Steve, like, where do you see this going from here, from here on to the future, right? We're talking about AI, but even just more of like, Steve, like understanding, like, how are we doing this? How are we moving from manual training and from, just moving through to digital customer education and so on and so forth?
Yeah, sure. I think that poll was really interesting, right? I think I did my math right, but it looked like 33% were of the folks on the line are doing self-paced learning, and the Delta doing some form of manual, kind of more traditional learning. I did see in the chat that some people are blending both, so that's awesome. So kudos to everybody who are kind of in that transition or have made that transition. I think today it's so important. I'd say it's imperative for companies to make the switch today, not just from a training best practice point of view, and kind of the efficacy of learning point of view for those reasons also, but from an executive point of view, from a CEO, CFO, COO point of view, I think it's imperative to make the switch from the manual traditional ways to the more modern digital ways for two really important reasons. So one is that this is just the way people expect to learn, right? I think all of us, all the people on this line, if we just say, how do we learn take ourselves out of work for a minute and put ourselves in our personal lives, how do we like to learn, right? If we want to learn how to cook something, to kind of Debbie's point before, if we want to learn how to play an instrument, how do we want to do that today, right? It's likely that we're pulling up YouTube, we're going to a masterclass, we're hitting one of the higher ed sites like edX or Coursera and some of that great education on there. It's likely that we're doing those on-demand, kind of self-paced learning. We do that in our personal lives, right? And so that's what we expect at work. We expect to be able to learn about the products we use at work and from the vendors that supply those products the same way we learn in our personal lives. B2B is no different, right? We're all humans at the end of the day. This is the way we like to learn. And that really accelerated over the past couple of years. So for one thing, why this is so important, this shift, is that customers expect it, right? And other like companies are offering this. 33% of the attendees on this line are offering that to customers, right? And everyone's customers are now becoming conditioned to seeing this new way of learning from their vendors, and so they expect it from every vendor now. So the customer expectations are really rising. So that's one. Two, I think most importantly and most relevant to today is growth. The days of growth at all costs, that's done. That's cooked for now. That's not where the market is. The markets are very efficiency minded, very profitability minded, and every company, every executive is looking at pockets of the business to say, hey, where can we get more productive? Where can we get more efficient? And I think training is a really, really big area. When I've been to do a bunch of customer success conferences over the past couple of weeks, they've been a ton of fun. And I've had a chance to sit down with a bunch of customer success managers, and almost every single one of them that I talk to says, I personally spend 30, 40, one person told me 70% of their time doing training. That's extremely expensive, for a business on both on a direct cost basis, but also on an opportunity cost basis, right? The CSMs are extremely valuable resources, and they could be driving revenue as opposed to doing routine, critical, but routine training. And so I think that because of where the markets are and the mandate of profitability and efficiency, companies need to begin making that transition of offloading training from implementers and CSMs and support personnel, and moving it into a digital way to really drive tremendous efficiency through the business. A lot of significant cost reduction, right? I don't mean headcount reduction. I mean just cost reduction by pulling it away from resources and allowing them to do more strategic work.
And to the point that you made earlier, Steve, about time to value is a huge metric for companies today in this economy, because we are no longer in that growth at any cost where we just throw headcount at things, right? Time to value for our customers is a primary metric. And I know for me this year, it is a primary metric, is to help show how customer education impacts time to value. One of the things that's really, really important for customer education teams, and especially for customer education leaders, is to really understand how they impact the business goal. So if that time to value is a goal, then that is something you really need to be tying. It's one of the reasons that I stay a practitioner and not just in executive leadership, is because I want to have my hands in the work and actually showing and actually doing this work to help move a company forward. And part of that, and I know we saw this in the feedback too, people are having problems getting people to come to the LMS. One of the problems with the LMS is something that I'm seeing solved by companies like Northpass and some of the other more customer education focused LMS, is that it's a better user experience. Your traditional LMS, some of those old school LMS, are too heavy, and it feels like we're back in school in 2000 or even in the 80s or the 90s for some of us, so it's that older, heavier feel. The new LMS, customer-facing LMS, are very different from an L&D LMS. The customer-facing LMS allows you to customize it so it feels like it's part of your brand, and actually gives a much better experience for customers. And that little nuance is something that people don't always understand. But if you've noticed, most of the companies in SaaS, in the technology space, a lot of them have added customer experience people along with customer success. And that's because we know that customer experience really drives revenue. It drives time to value. And customer education platforms that do this well and can brand into your brand really help drive your users. So I think that's one thing that can really help drive usage.
Yeah, I think that customer experience side is so key, Debbie. is I think there's like two, when I think about the value of customer education, I think there's two like really direct benefits. So one is that elevated customer experience, and it's just simply that's what customers expect, right? So give the customer what they expect. It's pretty cut and dry on that front. And then the other is just the efficiencies and the on the cost side of going digital versus traditional are, you know, night and day. And so I think that customer success efficiency and customer experience elevation are two really direct benefits for anybody like on the line having trouble with that leadership buy-in component of customer education. I think those are two areas that are direct benefit that any CFO, any COO really understands. But Debbie, you mentioned time to value. Can you just talk a little bit about like how you're seeing that really play out in the wild and in practice?
Sure. When a company buys software, there's a few things that happen. They buy software, they set up with their implementation manager, and that is a one-to-one contact, right? So that takes some time, but you already have people who are excited about it. If you can start your learning, if you can start training customers before they do their implementation, it's going to do a couple of things. It's going to make them more educated. It's going to make them more excited about the software. But two, it's going to help speed up their implementation because they're going to have the right questions to ask. If you do your training after your implementation, then what happens is you have novices, people who don't know how to use the software, who don't know what outcomes they could possibly drive for it, asking questions, but they don't know the right questions to ask. So some of that first onboarding digital learning that we should be sending out to customers is really about how we talk about the product. What are the problems that you can solve it? What are some cool cases? You know, we really need to bring that to the customers, that cool use case. How is this going to help you in your job? How is this going to make you a superstar in your job? And that's really how we can improve time to value, because once they start thinking like that, when they go to implementations or to consultants or to professional services or to their CSMs or to support, they're asking better questions, which means everything goes faster for them. And we're actually able to see that in reduction of time for implementation when we do training beforehand rather than after. So it's a huge help.
There was a question. Thanks for sharing that. I love that. There was a question in the chat actually that might play into this pretty well. Let me just read this out and let me know what you think, Debbie. But the person says, "Hey, don't you think that modern parentheses with no human touch will be hard in terms of on-the-spot questions, meaning when a customer needs an answer that a system cannot understand, will that make the customer leave?" I think that maybe what you're just talking about is like training before implementation, right? My thought is that what we see a lot is that reduces those on-the-spot questions later, right? Like it's really that upfront education before getting into the product implementation helps really drive down the volume of those inquiries around some of the basic concepts.
We often refer to those as the how do I questions. Support gets really tired of the how do I questions. Those how do I questions are really the questions, the how do I or why would I, those we can do in customer education. Every company that I've worked at now has not wanted to eliminate support. Like we always talk about reducing support tickets. The idea in reducing support tickets is not to eliminate support. It's really to get the right questions at support, because when people call in to ask the right question, it actually helps the product grow and it helps us think about how our customers are using it. So we don't want to totally eliminate it. And there'll always be times that chatbots are not going to be able to understand what we're asking it, right? Because, you know, chat can understand, you know, it's a computer program, right? And so if you think about computer programming in very basic language, I can only answer the question if I have already loaded it into my database. So if it hasn't been loaded in that word or in words that it recognizes, it's not going to spit that out. So we still need those people. But customer education can help us answer those real how do I or when should I? and
Yep.
then let support help the heavier lift.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about sort of how we can solve these problems and of currently, traditional customer education. But I'd love to hear, like, if you could give to the people who are listening, like, how do you actually go from point A to point B? How do you successfully transition from traditional training to digital customer education, or, from product training to, Debbie, how do you go from product tutorials to a thoughtful and comprehensive customer education experience?
It sounds really little when I say this, but it's actually a huge mindset shift. So it's no longer about us, the product. So we don't talk about product. We talk about what you can do as a customer with the product. Sounds simple. It's actually a huge mindset shift when you start doing this with teams. I'm going through this with my team right now at Visier, is we're switching that. Originally our content was created around the product. So we would always say things like, Visier lets you do this, or Visier's feature of X, Y, and Z will let you do this. Now instead, it's what can you solve? So what questions, because Visier is a people analytics software. And so what we help people do is help them solve their questions around their human resources, understand what the diversity and equity is, understand retention rates, right? So you can ask all of these questions. So we need to spin it so we're actually helping people ask the right questions so they can use our software, rather than talk about what our software does for them. So there are words that I tell my team they're no longer allowed to use. They are not allowed to use features. They're not allowed to use functions. And they're not allowed to use the word, it will allow you to, because then it's our mindset. So as soon as you see those, or can substitute the words on screen for those, that you're not thinking customer centric. So really switching that focus to the customer centricity is huge. And what I'm seeing as customer education is starting to do this, I'm seeing that spread throughout all the teams. I'm seeing CS even thinking about it, support, marketing, product. So it's really bringing that customer centricity to everyone, and it's coming out of customer education very often once you make that switch.
Debbie, I love that point about going from product centricity to customer centricity. It's a very impactful. It's a really important. It's a really substantial mindset change, and the tips you included there about like what words not to use, what words to look out for, to kind of check yourself if you're in one camp or the other. I think those are so interesting. I love that.
And it's funny, teams actually love it. There's a lot of change that people don't like, but that is a change that people like, because once they start to get it, it actually makes it easier, and it's more fun and more conversational to write the training too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then on the other side, of course, there's the whole tech side, right? So it's how do you actually go through the transition and, implement an LMS and get people from manually training their customers to training them, through self-paced courses. Steve, do you want to go into a little bit of the how to and the actual of going, like, what do you need to do to implement it successfully?
Sure. Well, I'd love to hear Debbie's thoughts on this too, but I think I'd love to just kind of riff on what Debbie said about going from like product mindset to customer mindset. I think that, like, if we start there, the path forward is so clear. From when you look at it from a leadership point of view, an organizational point of view, I think this technological shift and this new infrastructure and delivery infrastructure of training requires that leaders have that same mindset shift of thinking, instead of thinking about training as a supplement to a product, thinking about it more of a strategic asset to get customer centric, right? Instead of thinking about it as a kind of one and done, check the box during onboarding, leaders need to really start thinking about it as just a absolutely vital part of the entire customer journey. And so when leaders start to think about it from a customer point of view, start thinking about it from an outside in instead of an inside out point of view, that is one important step that the company needs to take. The other piece is, I think leaders really need to look at it from an economics point of view, an efficiency point of view, and really scrutinize, look across all the people and resources allocated doing training as 10% of their job, 30% of their job, 50% of the job, and how do you actually aggregate that and make that more efficient, right? And so leaders, I think, need to commit to looking at training from a customer point of view, and then acknowledge that training is happening in their business today, probably across a lot of different areas, and it's really expensive, and looking at how to make that much more operationally efficient. And I think when leadership can get to those two points, then it really helps the business make this digital transformation in the customer education area very rapid. And once leadership has the full buy-in behind that.
Yeah, and Steve, love that you brought that up. I'm actually going to be sending out after the webinar, when I follow up tomorrow with everybody. You will be getting this recorded tomorrow, don't worry, along with a few really fun pieces of content. So one thing is, like, they actually wrote a business case for digital customer education. So we have a lot of just examples and ways that you can actually talk about making that switch. And so, I mean, thanks for bringing that up, because it just reminded me to share that with everybody. And then just kind of like want to be conscious of time and just wrap things up a little bit. If you guys have questions, I see a couple of questions that are in the chat and in the Q&A already. But if you have some questions, please put them in now, because we'll get to the Q&A in a couple of minutes. But before we get there, I just want to just get some of your final thoughts, like a really quick just nugget of information. Steve, do you have just like one last thought that you want to share with everybody?
I actually have another question for Debbie, really. Ariel, you asked me that question about how to get a company to move to digital, but Debbie, you've been part of a couple of companies that have done that. Can you just kind of share your perspective on that same question?
Sure. One of the things, so you have to have buy-in across teams. So one of the things that I often see in companies is real siloed teams, especially siloed teams of people building content. So I stole a concept from Daniel Quick, and when he was back at Asana, he set up an education guild, and I love that idea. So I've tried it in various ways. So we've tried the meetings, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, depending on company culture. But most companies have either Slack or Teams. Those seem to be the two that most are using, and setting up a chat room where you can actually talk across company about how you're shifting your language for your educational material so that everyone is seeing what you're doing. And then also working in that channel to keep track of what you're creating versus what everyone else is creating. So that way you can work together to save that time and energy and actually be building content together instead of in silos.
I love that.
Huge.
That's great.
The Education Guild, that's awesome. I know some of our team is on that. So for everyone in the Northpass team that heard that, I think that's really, really interesting concept to spin up in our own Slack channel.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so before we jump into the Q&A, I just want to thank both of you. I mean, so much information, and we could probably talk about this for another 2 hours or more. But we'll definitely just want to make sure we answer the questions that have been asked. And for all of you on the chat or just here in the webinar, in the chat, I'm just going to pop a link. So if you want to get in touch with Debbie, she's on LinkedIn. She's now the president of SEDMA. So here's just a link to SEDMA if you want some more information. And definitely reach out if you want to connect, or really, if you're serious about wanting to improve your customer education content, she'll definitely be able to point you in the right direction. And then if you're interested in learning about transitioning from manual training to digital customer education, you could definitely come and chat with somebody from Northpass, and we'll help you just understand the challenges and the solutions and what you can do to help get you from where you are now to where you want to be. I'm gonna definitely have that in the chat. If we could pop that in there, I think someone from our team will pop that in there really soon. Or I'll definitely just send it in a follow-up email. And then alternatively, we have so many tools on our website in like Northpass resources. So, definitely go there, check it out. And we're going to, give you all the answers and all the help that you can to help move your customer education program forward. So I've got a few questions, so going to jump into them now. So from an anonymous attendee, I'm very excited about that. What does time to value look like from an onboarding perspective, just to make sure training happens prior to the implementation? Debbie, I feel like that's definitely in your direction.
Yeah, so there's actually more to that. So when we look at time to value, so from the time the customer makes the purchase to the time that they're actually using the product and getting value from it and determining what that value is. So part of the sales process should be defining what value is for the customer. So if you go through all of your implementations and you look at right now what your time to value is, so I know we started with something like a 16-week time to value. So we set a goal to bring it down to like 8 weeks, right? So how are we going to get there? So thinking about, okay, are we training at the right point? Let's get training in the right point. But even more important, are we training the right things at the right time? So we can do the intro content right at the beginning before they start implementation. But as they're going through implementation, there may be some hands-on training that we want to help them with as they're doing it. And then after onboarding, there's a term that I've heard, and I can't remember who coined it, but we've seen it a lot lately. It's called everboarding. And the reason everboarding is important over onboarding, because onboarding is just the time to first value. But there's second, third, fourth, fifth value. There's all this other value that people can get. So if you only think of training and time to value from just the onboarding point of view, you're going to miss out on the rest of the customer life cycle. And you're not going to be thinking about potential churn, because if you're everboarding, if you're always onboarding, you're going to be really preventing churn. Plus, if someone leaves that company at your customer and you lose your champion, if you're constantly boarding, if you're doing that everboarding, then you're constantly training them. You're going to create a new champion instead of losing the customer. So it's all the time that you're thinking about onboarding, everboarding, and time to value.
The everboarding concept is great. I've never heard that term, but as you were saying that, I was thinking about something that Pam just chimed in here with. She said, and new users. And I think that's so relevant, right? Because you have that initial onboarding, and it's going to be probably someone that was designated during that buying committee process. But then within weeks, certainly within months, you're going to have, if the program's successful, you're going to have a lot more users coming onto those products and those applications. And most of the time they are just as new to the why and the how. And so making sure that the education program is set up to engage those users right away and get them everboarded is so important. And it goes with new product launches, right? New product capabilities.
Exactly.
Well, so everboarding is now a term I'm going to be using all the time. It is my new favorite word. So thank you for that. And so our next question is, what's holding customer education teams back from succeeding across the board?
So that is a huge pet peeve of mine. I have many friends who have been laid off in these times, and the one thing that I hear consistent from the teams who have been impacted is that leadership didn't understand the value of customer education. So I honestly believe the biggest problem for customer education is customer education leaders. We need to be able to, it's really hard. We have to be a very multifaceted leader, because not only do we have to be able to lead people, but we need to understand learning science and when to use it and when to use learning models. And we shouldn't be talking about learning models and butts and seats to leadership, because that's not what they care about. We need to be talking about business impact. So you have to, you absolutely have to. If you have a customer education program and you are not tracking the value of your customer education, if you're not tracking the impact against your OKRs, if your OKR is time to value, if the company OKRs are around ARR, if they're around churn, if they're around NPS, you should be tracking how your customers who are trained by e-learning, by certification, by instructor-led, you should be tracking how all of those separate and together impact the corporate metrics. When you talk to the leadership above you, you need to be talking in business terms. If you're not doing that, and if they don't understand the business terms enough to talk it up to the next level, then there's going to be a problem with it. If they truly understand the value of customer education, they're not going to get rid of it, because customer education is going to help move ARR. It's going to decrease churn. And we know that. And there's lots of research out there now showing it. But we need to be able to show how we affect it at our companies to prove the value.
I think adding like the tech point of view on that, we've been doing some work that's tons of fun and so high impact with customer success platforms, that have the ARR data, have the churn data, have the time to value data, and injecting learning data into those reporting models has really helped customer education leaders demonstrate visually the impact on MPS, the impact on onboarding time, the impact on expansion opportunities. And so I think, for the audience, if you have a customer success management platform out there, really looking to push learning data into that and show those correlations is a really powerful way to do exactly what Debbie has just been talking about.
And if you don't have the resources right away to get into it, because I've been in that position where I couldn't get the resources right away, right? The thing about the learning management systems is there is ways to pull it down and extract it. You can then extract your data from your CRM, whether it's Salesforce, HubSpot, or any of the other ones. You can extract it, and then you do, Excel's great. You can pull out, you can create the charts in Excel. And there's some templates around that different people have to help do that. So yes, we prefer to have it in a true analytics dashboard. That's the maturity. That's a mature company, a mature education program. But many of us, when we're starting, we have to start out with the manual, and we can't wait to start showing the data. We should be doing internal QBRs to show the quarterly business value of what we do. That is going to help gain buy-in from executive leadership.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
Ariel, I saw a question pop up in the webinar chat. Did
Yep.
you catch that one from Julia?
I'm on another one, but there's also one from
Awesome. I'll read this one out if you want.
Yeah, no, I've got Julia's. So there's two, and I think they're quick answers. So I think we could get to both of them.
Awesome.
So from Julia, so which skills and experiences do you value when you hire customer education leaders to join your team? Oh no, we lost.
Did we lose Debbie?
We lost Debbie.
Guess I'm on the spot till she comes back, huh?
Yeah,
I'll roll with that one. So I think I think a couple of things. So one is it kind of depends on what you're trying to accomplish exactly. but I think there are three fundamental skills that you really want to look at. One is, if you're just getting started with the program, finding someone who can really drive it forward, right? And finding someone who can really work cross-functionally, someone who can be an incredible project and program manager that can interface with customers to understand what their needs are, interface with the product teams to understand what capabilities are there. It can work across functionally with marketing for content generation and promotion. Can work with the CS teams for input and distribution. So if you're just starting, kind of that well-rounded project manager is so important. I think as programs evolve and they become staffed, with larger teams, finding people that really, and I wish Debbie were here for this, but I think I can confidently say she'd agree, is finding someone who really understands the customer education methods of instructional design, which are different than the L&D methods of instructional design. So yes, I think those
joining back. Yay.
There she is. So I think those pieces are really important pieces. And then, one of the biggest concerns, biggest struggles in our early poll was getting adoption on the program. And so one of our customers told me once that when they built their academy, they treated it like a product and they promoted it like a product. And so for every piece of content that they built, whether it was a single course or a full-blown certificate program, they made sure that they had a proper promotional plan behind it. So when you're looking at the skills of people to add to the team, that's a really important area to make sure is covered. Having skills on the team that can promote the program effectively and drive the adoption. So welcome back, Debbie.
Yes, Debbie, I wanted to
tackle that one, but
someone hit a telephone pole, took out the electricity, so I had to wait for the generator to kick in.
Oh my God.
Oh no, I hope they're okay.
No injuries, but at least that's what my husband's going up to me.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, Steve was just giving an answer to why sort of things to look out for hiring. And Steve brought up a point that I think you could just give a little bit more insight into, because you are an instructional designer, is the ability to instructional design for customer education. And I'd love just to end today with that point. That would be awesome.
So that's one of the biggest things. I find people have a really hard time transitioning from L&D to customer education. Customer education, you really need to know all of the learning science and when to use it. You need to know things like Mayer's 12th principle, cognitive load, all of that stuff. But you need to know it and then be able to let go of it and use the pieces out of it and simplify it and really think about simplifying everything you're doing. I've seen instances where people got into Gagne's 9 events, and then they would put all 9 events from Gagne into a 15-minute e-learning. That doesn't work, right? So you have to be very flexible to be in customer education, and you can be a little bit more rigid in some of the other areas. So that's something I really look for, is that flexibility and the ability to simplify.
Great. That is an excellent way to end today's talk. I just want to thank both of you, Debbie, Steve. Thank you so much for your incredible insights and for sharing your time with all of us today. Everybody on the webinar, loved having you here. Loved the chat going on during the conversation. You guys asked incredible questions, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Debbie. Thanks, Ariel. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.